Most men don't even notice when it starts. Not really. It's not a decision, not an urge, not a loud desire. It's fatigue, quiet, familiar. The moment you reach for your phone, not because you want anything, but because you can't stand being with yourself. That's silence. That's the pain you've never named. And porn isn't the sin. It's the silence you filled with pixels because reality stopped responding to your presence. This isn't about lust. Lust was a long time ago, before the disappointments, before the cold bed, before the nights where no one noticed you weren't okay. The screen isn't about excitement. It's about control. It's about knowing what happens next, when everything else in your life stopped making sense. And it's about ritual, emotional autopilot, the last place where you don't have to explain yourself, prove yourself, or ask for anything. But deep down, you know what it's costing you. Zeno of Citium lost everything in a shipwreck. Wealth, plans, identity, all gone. And in that loss, something unexpected was born. Stoicism. Not as a philosophy of escape, but a way of standing still in the storm. What he lost wasn't the tragedy. What he built afterward, that was the revelation. That's the man you might be ready to meet. You've used this ritual for years, maybe decades. And I won't insult you by pretending this is just about habit. It's not. It's about dignity, the kind you lost without even noticing, the kind that slips when you stop being seen, by others, and then by yourself. This screen gave you comfort, but it stole something sacred in return. The presence you used to carry without thinking, the weight in your voice, the gravity in your silence, the man who didn't flinch when things got hard, because he remembered who he was. Seneca warned that most men waste their lives chasing illusions. He wasn't talking about lust. He was talking about time, about how easily we trade presence for performance. You didn't watch because you wanted to feel more. You watched because you didn't want to feel at all. This isn't a challenge. This isn't a 10-day no-porn reboot. This is war, quiet, personal, sacred. These 10 days aren't about proving anything. They're about what happens when you stop numbing and start noticing. What surfaces when the noise dies down. What stares back at you when there's no distraction left to blame. You won't hear shame here. You've had enough of that. You won't hear solutions. You've tried all of them. What you'll hear is silence. Structured, sacred, masculine silence. The kind that holds pain without judgment. The kind that makes boys into men. And the kind that will walk with you through every craving, not to suppress it, but to understand who you became in its absence. This is not about addiction. This is about identity. Who you are when you stop reaching for relief. Who you could become when you start sitting with the discomfort you've buried under repetition. And who you might remember when you stop surviving and start standing still. This is day one, and nothing about it is small. It doesn't scream, it doesn't crash. It seeps in quietly, like fog at dawn. You didn't notice the moment you stopped being fully there. You still showed up, you still worked, you still laughed at the right moments, but something underneath stopped moving. Your eyes stopped holding weight. Your voice lost its edge. You became present in body, but hollow in presence. Porn didn't take your power, it numbed it. Softly, repeatedly, and that's what made it so dangerous. It didn't feel like damage, it felt like escape. But the price of that escape was your edge, your energy, your masculine weight. Every session promised relief, but each time you came back a little less anchored, a little more absent, a little more forgettable. Science has names for it: dopamine desensitization, neural rewiring, motivation suppression. But you didn't need research to know something was off. You felt it, the fading interest in real things, the quiet detachment from your own ambition. You used to walk into a room and feel its gravity shift. Now, you disappear. No one means to ignore you. They just don't feel you anymore. And that's what presence is. It's not loud. It's not theatrical. It's the quiet pull a man has when he knows who he is, even when he says nothing. Porn doesn't just sedate desire. It strips presence from the inside out. It rewires your nervous system to crave instant comfort and reject sustained effort. It teaches your body to seek pleasure without connection, control without intimacy, movement without meaning. Think about the last time your son asked you something and you didn't really hear him, or the last time your partner looked at you, not with love, but with distance. She didn't say it, but something changed. You weren't there, not in the way you used to be. That's the danger of this habit, not the shame, not the guilt, but the slow erosion of your masculine presence. You become a man people can't feel anymore. And eventually, a man even you can't feel anymore. And when a man can't feel himself, he forgets how to lead, how to stand, how to speak from his center. These first 10 days aren't just about restraint. They're about remembering how it feels to truly exist in your own body, to hold a gaze, to speak with rootedness, to be in a room and be undeniable again. It starts with a feeling you never had words for, just weight, a kind of emotional noise you couldn't turn down. You didn't choose porn to feel more. You chose it to feel less. You chose it because it was simple, predictable, safe. It didn't ask questions. It didn't remind you of who you used to be. It just gave you silence, manufactured, temporary, but silence nonetheless. But silence without reflection becomes a cell, and over time, the man who avoids his emotions builds walls he can't even see. You weren't chasing thrill. You were escaping thought, escaping the echoes that returned every time the room went quiet, escaping the truth that maybe you no longer recognize the man you were becoming. And every escape reinforced the same lie, that your emotions were dangerous, shameful, or too heavy to hold. Emotional avoidance doesn't look dramatic. It looks like habit, like distraction, like routine that numbs instead of nourishes. You go to work, you answer messages, you pretend to be okay, but inside, the distance grows, not just from others, but from yourself, from the parts of you that needed to be seen, heard, and held with masculine stillness, not suppressed with shallow relief. Your brain adjusts. It rewires. Each act of avoidance teaches your mind to fear stillness, to distrust quiet, to crave stimulation, even when it doesn't satisfy. And slowly, the capacity to sit with discomfort disappears. You lose the muscle to endure your own truth, and in that loss, you forfeit your ability to lead. Not because you're weak, but because you can no longer face the mirror without reaching for a screen. There's a moment when every man realizes he can't hear himself anymore. His thoughts feel foreign. His emotions feel like threats. That's not madness. That's emotional starvation. Years of running from what needed to be felt. Years of teaching your nervous system to avoid depth. Years of self-erasure masked as control. These 10 days aren't about what you stop doing. They're about what returns when you stop running. Your breath, your center, your grounded presence in the face of discomfort, and the quiet dignity of a man who no longer fears the sound of his own mind. At first it felt like desire, like something primal you couldn't contain. But over time, you began to notice this wasn't hunger. This wasn't attraction. This was something colder, something more automatic. It wasn't about who you wanted. It was about what you didn't want to feel. Beneath the surface of every compulsive act is a wound, not always visible, not always recent, not always, but real. For many men, it's not arousal they chase. It's escape, not intimacy, but invisibility. And what looks like craving is often just exhaustion. The exhaustion of trying to be enough in a world that keeps telling you you're not. A man once said, "I didn't watch because I was turned on. I watched because it was the only time I wasn't being judged." He wasn't talking about lust. He was talking about a moment of relief, where he didn't have to perform, explain, or pretend. Just for a few minutes, no one questioned his worth. No one measured his masculinity. No one demanded his strength while ignoring his fatigue. Porn became his shield, not from desire, but from disapproval, from feeling weak, unchosen, unseen. And that's what so many men carry in silence. Not addiction to sex, but addiction to safety. Addiction to control in a life where they've felt powerless too long. When masculinity becomes a response to fear, when it's used as armor instead of presence, it loses its essence. You stop connecting. You start coping. You stop reaching. You start hiding. The ritual becomes routine, and the routine becomes a cage. And here's the quiet truth. The moment you stop escaping is the moment you start grieving. Not the habit, but the years lost behind it. The relationships that never saw the real you. The moments you chose relief instead of respect. The times you betrayed your own body, not with another person, but by refusing to feel what it was asking you to feel. But that grief is sacred. It's not weakness. It's memory. It's your body remembering that you used to live with more weight, more direction, more fire. That underneath the numbness is not lust, but the man who stopped believing his presence mattered. And he still does, but you won't find him through pleasure. You'll find him through stillness, through discomfort, through the quiet power of no longer running from the parts of you that never needed to be hidden. Your body learns faster than your mind. Every repeated action becomes a language. And without knowing it, you've taught your nervous system what intimacy means by showing it the same illusion over and over again. Not warmth, not surrender, not presence, but transaction, control, isolation, thousands of clicks, each one a rehearsal of false connection. The screen doesn't ask you to listen. It doesn't demand patience. It doesn't respond to your energy or presence. It just reacts, on command. And over time, that teaches you something dangerous. That connection is performance, not presence. That desire doesn't require depth. That human intimacy can be reduced to fragments and pixels. Your nervous system internalizes this rhythm. Mirror neurons, once meant to decode the emotions of others, are now trained to respond to repetition, novelty, detachment. You begin to lose the subtle instincts that once made you emotionally intelligent. You forget how to feel the shift in a room, how to read the breath in a woman's silence, how to lead with awareness instead of assumption, and then it starts to show. You sit across from someone who wants to connect with you, and you feel nothing. Not because you don't care, but because your body no longer knows how to respond without a script, without control, without the artificial familiarity it's become addicted to. It's no surprise that real couples, in real therapy, describe this distance. I'm here, but I don't feel him. He looks at me, but not into me. We touch, but something's missing. What's missing isn't love. It's presence. It's the man who used to lead from his center, not from conditioned escape. The greatest irony is this. The thing you've been craving wasn't release. It was resonance. To feel seen, to be felt, to connect, not just with someone, but with yourself in the presence of someone. But that hunger got rerouted, rewritten, repackaged into a performance you watched alone in the dark, thinking it was desire, when it was just your nervous system trying to remember what real connection felt like. There's grief in that, but also power, because what was conditioned can be unlearned, slowly, silently, through moments of restraint, through reclaiming breath over impulse, through remembering that real intimacy isn't chosen on a screen. It's earned in stillness, discomfort, and the courage to stay when everything in you wants to run. You never had to say it out loud, but you felt it. That quiet hesitation, that subtle tightening in your chest when someone got too close. Not physically, but emotionally. It wasn't rejection you feared, it was exposure. The kind of nakedness that no screen could ever simulate. The kind where someone sees you, not just your body, but your uncertainty, your doubt, your unfinished questions. Porn never asked for that. It offered control, a curated world where you decided the scene, the pace, the ending. No discomfort, no waiting, no vulnerability. Just a predictable story on your terms. And that predictability became your refuge, your temple, your escape from the terrifying truth that real intimacy doesn't obey. In real connection, there is silence, there is uncertainty. There are moments where you don't know what to say or what she's thinking. Moments where your old armor doesn't work. And in that discomfort, you're either forced to grow or you run. And most men, without ever choosing it consciously, have chosen the second path more times than they realize. Not because they're weak, but because no one ever taught them how to stay, how to hold discomfort without fleeing, how to feel small in a moment and still remain rooted, how to be seen not as a protector or provider, but as a flawed, emotional human being and survive it. Porn doesn't just give you control over scenes, it quietly teaches your nervous system that connection is dangerous, that the safest place for your desire is in isolation, that to be wanted is fine, but to be known is too much. So you learn to perform without participating, to touch without being touched, to give just enough, but never your full emotional weight. But here's what most men don't realize until years pass. The more you avoid exposure, the more hollow you become. And what begins as control ends in absence. You're there, but no one feels you. You speak, but your words don't land. You offer love, but it doesn't resonate, because something inside you is holding back, afraid of being fully seen. Philosophers warned of this kind of man, the man who builds his world so perfectly that nothing can penetrate it, but nothing can reach him either. Stoicism isn't about building walls, it's about building strength. The strength to remain open without being destroyed, to risk being misunderstood without folding, to hold your breath, your truth, your soul, without apology. And that's the work of these 10 days. Not to reject pleasure, but to challenge control. To begin replacing performance with presence. to trade artificial certainty for real connection, and to remember that the strongest men aren't the ones who script their lives, but the ones who can sit in the silence, be exposed, and still choose to stay. The shift doesn't come with noise. It doesn't arrive with clarity or pride. It arrives with discomfort, the kind that lingers just beneath the skin. Around day 10 you notice it, not as victory, but as restlessness. Your body wants the ritual. Your mind craves the familiar exit, but something deeper, something quieter, tells you not to reach for it this time. This isn't withdrawal from pleasure. It's confrontation with abandonment. Not hers, yours. The parts of yourself you neglected, ignored, or silenced just to keep moving. The nights you avoided your reflection. The mornings you reached for a screen before your breath even stabilized. You weren't soothing yourself. You were disappearing from yourself. Now the silence is loud, not because it hurts, but because it exposes. The illusions begin to fall. The comfort begins to ache, and for the first time in a long time, you're forced to sit with the reality of who you've become and who you've forgotten. This is where Stoic clarity begins, not with motivation, not with performance, but with observation, a kind of internal watching, detached, steady, still. You ask yourself not, why did I do this, but what was I avoiding? And the answers don't scream, they whisper, quiet memories, emotional fatigue, moments of rejection you never mourned, expectations you collapsed under, without a word. There's a practice here, simple, daily, 5 minutes, no screens, no tasks, just breath, just silence, just you. Let the discomfort rise, let it burn a little, and then let it sit. You don't run, you don't reach, you don't react. You just breathe, you stay. And that stillness, those 5 minutes, that's where the rewiring begins. Because identity isn't rebuilt in grand gestures, it's rebuilt in these invisible decisions, in the refusal to betray yourself, even when no one's watching, in the quiet choice to stay present when your past screams for escape, in the sacred pause between impulse and action, where dignity returns. This isn't about quitting porn. This is about reclaiming self-respect, the kind you feel when you can hold silence without panic, the kind that grows when you don't reach for validation, the kind that can only come from one place, staying with yourself long enough to remember who you used to be before you disappeared behind the screen. He didn't announce it. He didn't write about it. He didn't explain himself to anyone. He just stopped. 49 years old, decades of silence buried beneath habit, years of retreating to a screen when life asked for presence. But one night, in a house that no longer echoed his authority, he turned the page in silence. No speeches, no declarations, just one decision, no more disappearing. 3 months passed. The house didn't get louder. It got stiller. The tension that once filled the air with unspoken disappointment started to dissolve, not because anything dramatic changed, but because he changed. His son noticed first. The eye contact that had once been brief became anchored. The silence that had felt cold now held weight. He wasn't performing fatherhood. He was embodying it. Presence has no volume. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to be explained. It is felt. And when a man stops escaping, he begins radiating. Not intensity, not control, but clarity. His son didn't mirror his words. He mirrored his silence. The kind of silence that says, I'm here, I'm steady, I'm not running anymore. This man didn't reclaim respect through argument. He didn't beg to be seen. He became respectable by returning to himself, day by day, quietly. And that quiet became contagious. The boy who used to keep his head down started lifting it. The conversations changed, not in content, but in energy. They began to meet each other not as strangers in the same home, but as men learning how to hold space again. This is what Stoic masculinity does. It restores without force. It leads without volume. It teaches through energy. A father doesn't need to be perfect. He just needs to be present. And that presence doesn't come from avoiding weakness. It comes from choosing to face it and stand anyway. No one clapped. No one celebrated. But the shift was undeniable. A man returned to himself, and in doing so, gave his son permission to do the same. That's legacy, not in what he left behind, but in what he silently stood for. This was never about arousal, never about sex. It was about silence. The kind you tried to drown with habit, the kind that wrapped itself around your evenings, your thoughts, your soul, until numbness became your normal, and you didn't even know you were starving. You weren't weak. You were unseen. You weren't broken. You were unprotected. No one told you that masculinity without stillness becomes a prison of noise, that pleasure without presence becomes punishment, that what you called relief was often just your body trying to breathe in a world that stopped listening. Zeno lost everything in a shipwreck, not just goods, but identity. And in that wreckage, he didn't rebuild a life. He rebuilt a philosophy. The ship was never the point. It was the illusion of control he had to lose before he could find his spine. That's what you've started to do here. These 10 days weren't about quitting. They were about remembering. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for glory. He wrote them in war, to survive the one within. Porn isn't your enemy. It's your mirror. And silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of self. These days have stripped something from you. Not your desire, but your dependence. Not your masculinity, but your forgetfulness. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to explain to be valid. You don't need to quit everything to be clean. You need one vow, to face what you've numbed, and stop leaving yourself behind. And when you do, when you sit in that silence and don't flinch, you won't just feel stronger, you'll feel real. Respect doesn't come from abstinence. It comes from alignment, from no longer betraying your own gaze, from standing still in your discomfort and realizing it won't destroy you. It will free you. That's when people notice, not because you've changed, but because you've returned. You'll know the work is working when you don't rush to fill the silence, because the man sitting in it finally feels like someone worth being.